Greetings, Montana, and hello, world. It's Chris Hislop here with another round of Academic World Quest Prep webcasts. This is a series of webcasts where we engage experts from our partners at the U.S. Department of State on key issues that will appear in this year's Academic World Quest, which is our flagship program for Montana students. It's a 3-day international education summit that brings the best and the brightest of Montana's high schoolers to the University of Montana campus to talk about international affairs, international dynamics with ambassadors, consuls general, authors, and thought leaders from around the world, touching on the key issues of the day. And to help our students prepare for this, we've engaged the U.S. Department of State's experts on a number of these issues. So before I begin, let me start with a very short video from our partners at our friends from the U.S. Department of State. One moment, please.
It's a wonderful and complex world out there, filled with challenges and opportunities. That's why America's diplomats with the U.S. Department of State are on the job every day, representing you. We are advancing America's foreign policy interests by uniting our allies, confronting our adversaries, and protecting our citizens. We advance democracy, human rights, global health, and more. We grow markets that create American jobs. We are America's first federal agency, and we're in 190 countries and over 270 U.S. embassies and consulates serving you. We are the United States Department of State.
Such a cool video, and it's great to have the U.S. Department of State on as our partner. I'd also like to thank very quickly the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, First Interstate Bank, Humanities Montana, and Clearwater Credit Union, who help us bring this and so many more programs to you. Now, let me introduce our very special guest, Nick Hirsch. He's a program officer with the Sports Diplomacy Division in the Department of State's Bureau of Educational Cultural Affairs. Prior to joining the Sports Diplomacy Division, Nick was a contractor overseeing programs in East Asia and the Pacific region for the Department of State's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor. Nick grew up in Hong Kong and has his bachelor's degree from the University of Denver and his master's degree from the George Washington University. Nick, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. How about yourself?
Very good, very good. We are having an incredible morning out here in Montana, having spoken with two of your colleagues, one on Korea, the other on the Global South. And if anybody watching missed any of those programs, you can catch them on our YouTube channel, as this one will also be uploaded when we're done. But Nick, look, how cool, sports and diplomacy. I mean, who doesn't love that? Maybe you could just zero us in a little bit on what is it and what does it really mean? Over to you.
Yeah, definitely. When I got the job offer, I couldn't say no, seeing such a cool office. But yeah, I would like to say like sports is an incredible diplomatic tool. And there are clear examples, I think, throughout history, how sports has driven different political and cultural change. Whether that was through Jesse Owens, the track star who defied Hitler in 1936, or in ways which sports helped bring an end to apartheid in South Africa and the United States, 1980 Olympic boycott in the Soviet Union. I think we've seen throughout history, sport has the power to shift international relations. And in that same vein, I think the Department of State itself has a storied history of using sports and collaborating with U.S. athletes to promote friendship and engage with foreign officials, athletes, and the public audiences. I think while ping pong diplomacy in the 70s is perhaps the most well-known U.S. sports diplomacy effort, the State Department has facilitated earlier sports diplomacy engagements, including those with baseball's trailblazer Jackie Robinson, Olympic champion Bob Mathis, and yeah, American basketball stars like Bill Russell and the Harlem Globetrotters touring Eastern Bloc in the 1960s. But it wasn't until 2002 or 2001, the Sports Diplomacy Division, or formerly known as Sports United, was established in the wake of 9/11 as a means of reaching out to youth in the Middle East through soccer. Um, since the division's creation, the division's scope and region, sport, and participants have since broadened quite wide. For example, we even had a program focused on flying disc golf in Russia and youth entrepreneurship. Uh, so our division, being founded in 2002 is quite young relative to the other divisions and offices within the State Department you might have heard from this week or will be hearing from the rest of the week. Uh, the division is currently housed in, as you mentioned, the Educational and Cultural Affairs Bureau, and the Sports Diplomacy Division's programs primarily fulfill the mandate outlined in the Fulbright-Hays Act to promote mutual understanding through shared educational and cultural interests for the promotion of friendly relations between the United States and other countries. Here at State and in the division, we find that sports provide a unique avenue for the State Department to open doors in hard to reach places and engage communities at the grassroots and people level that might have not been reached through other more traditional efforts or department programming. And when leveraged thoughtfully and strategically, sports serves as a great hook for us to champion other foreign policy priorities, such as inclusion, youth empowerment, gender equality, health and wellness, conflict resolution, entrepreneurship. Sports also allows us the opportunity to engage Americans who are also interested in these areas of development using sports for social change. All in all, I think we find that sports diplomacy has helped us build ever strengthening relations between the United States and other nations, using the universal passion for sports to transcend, linguistic and socio-cultural differences and bring people together. And I think it's especially valuable for vulnerable communities such as women and girls, at-risk youth, refugee populations, and people with disabilities. I think, as mentioned, we know that sports can be a platform to champion foreign policy priorities, and our division primarily focuses on running different programs, not only promoting these priorities, such as inclusion, gender empowerment, supporting people with disabilities, but programs are also meant for us to increase dialogue and cultural understanding, creating a more global, stable society, using sport as a platform to expose foreign participants to American culture, while also providing our American participants with the opportunity to establish links with foreign peers and professionals. And it's important to note that I think I mentioned all these goals and kind of what we're hoping to gain, that sport is not the silver bullet to fulfill these goals and priorities, but it can be helpful to start to reach them. The Sports Diplomacy Division, as I mentioned, we primarily run programs, and we have four main pillar of programs which we work with our embassies and consulates around the world to implement. Importantly, we also rely on our INGO and university partners to assist us on the day-to-day, such as the Mansfield Center in Montana. And our first and probably more visible program is our Sports Envoy program. That's where we work with different sports federations and leagues to recruit current and former American professional athletes and coaches to act as ambassadors of goodwill on behalf of the U.S. government. While they are short-term programs, they come with big footprint and large media attention locally. Our envoys primarily share lessons learned on and off the playing field about the importance of education, inclusion, community engagement. And importantly, our envoys are able to open doors at the ministerial level to discuss these issues and how sports can be used as a tool to tackle or foster development of these social issues. We don't always necessarily send out the big splash names, but find folks that understand kind of the importance sports has for these communities. So it's really not just shaking hands and doing photo ops, but leading like week-long camps in Ethiopia and other countries and serving as a role model. But that said, we have been able to in the past send out some very notable alumni envoys, including Shaquille O'Neal, Alex Morgan, Anson Carter, Brandy Chastain, Hillary Knight, and a whole host of others. And one of our second main programs is the Sports Visitor Program, which is a 2 to 3 week US based exchange for non-elite youth athletes. We don't need athletes from around the countries to be one of the best athletes in the sport from their country to join, but are looking for athletes that can be change agents in their community. So participants join a thematic camp, whether it's on sports and STEM, women empowerment, marginalized communities, alongside American peers, and engage in on-the-field sports training, as well as workshops and site visits that further, I think, all participants' understanding of the United States, hopefully dispel stereotypes or misinformation on each other, and promote social development with a particular focus on leadership and empowerment. And we also find that the Sports Visitor Program is an ideal way to reach, I think, emerging youth voices around the world, and especially traditionally underserved audiences and non-English speakers. And then the third program, which is the program I manage, is the International Sports Program and Initiative, which is a 10-day reciprocal exchange, which targets coaches, sports administrators, and youth influencers. And by youth influencers, I mean more like community leaders or NGOs or other individuals that have the ability to influence youth in their home countries. And so the program promotes coaching and administrative skills, creates connections with relevant US sports organizations, and empowers youth influencers to create a more inclusive and effective sports initiative in their home countries. And just to emphasize, it's not necessarily teaching coaches just how to coach, but seeing how they can provide leadership skills and more inclusion for marginalized populations and female athletes, for example, for the teams that they coach. So I think one of our examples is we bring, coaches from somewhere in Southeast Asia to the US, and sure, we have them learn kind of some of the coaching skills that maybe an NCAA soccer team would teach their kids in whatever university in the US that they're visiting. But it's also how they recruit and foster inclusion within the team, or bring in kind of inclusive voices in the recruiting kind of phase. And finally, our fourth program is our Global Sports Mentoring Program, which is a public-private partnership with ESPNW, and it's focused on disability rights and empowering women in sports. The Global Sports Mentoring Program is a 5-week, pretty immersive mentorship that matches international, emerging, and established leaders from the private sector, government, nonprofit sectors, and pair them with leading executives in academia, business, media, and just generally the sports sectors from America's kind of top sports-driven organizations. Kind of using a mentorship and public-private model, and kind of fostering linkages and participant-led action plans. Delegates and kind of these kind of mentees learn the skills needed to advance into decision-making positions and create pathways for women, girls, and peoples with disability to pursue sport as a passion, profession, educational vehicle, or as a career as a whole. And mentees engage with a wide range of mentors from different organizations, including teams such as the Green Bay Packers, for example. Although we are a pretty small team, I think we have like 4 or 5 of us. We also develop programs around mega sporting events and big international days, and policy-driven events such as kind of the Sports and Sustainability Initiative, where we use sports to highlight environmental issues with a focus on youth and emerging leaders around the world. And with the upcoming mega events in the US, I'm assuming a pretty hefty workload from the vision soon. We have the LA 28 Olympics, the Copa America next year, the Soccer World Cup, Rugby World Cup, and many, many others. But yeah, I think that's kind of the division and what we do as concise and hopefully as clear as I can do.
Nick, that was perfect. And you've managed to make a cool thing even cooler in your description. I mean, wow, what a great thing to do. it's interesting that, this counterpoint between what many of us are, our stereotype of diplomacy is often hard-nosed political negotiations over difficult conflicts. But here is this wide range of more soft power-oriented diplomacy, and you've really laid it out extremely well, and it's a really compelling case for American diplomacy. And I'll just add very quickly on the Envoy program that should you need any beer league hockey players, here in Montana, we have a lot of great hockey and a lot of great craft beer. So, send us an email if if you need anybody on that note. But let me just say for our participants, please feel free to chat in a question to me directly or to the group in the chat box. I'll curate those questions and ask Nick. And while I'm waiting for your questions, let me start with one, Nick. I mean, you mentioned it in passing. Of course, you're going to get this question on the famous ping pong diplomacy. Now, I'll just add quickly, 3 years ago here in our academic World Quest, we celebrated ping pong diplomacy by having a ping pong tournament, and we talked about that extraordinary story. So if you wouldn't mind, because it really, I think, underscores a hugely substantive element in history and in foreign policy, tell us what happened, and more important, or equally important, is what impact did this have on American foreign policy and U.S.-China relations?
I think I'm no historian, so if I get anything wrong, please don't hold it against me. But the ping pong democracy, obviously, I think we all know with China for a while, especially after World War II and the Chinese Civil War, we've had some pretty adversarial relations with the government at that point. But the ping pong diplomacy itself refers to, I think, the initial exchange of ping pong players between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China in the early 1970s. And it began, I think, it started with its first encounter during table tennis world championship in Japan, I want to say. And kind of that exchange between this one Chinese ping pong player and a U.S. ping pong player led to kind of the promotion of people-to-people exchange, and during a period of isolation and distrust, really kind of thawed that relationship and kind of dispel some stereotypes, I think, among the two nations, and it paved the way for former President Richard Nixon's visit to Beijing in, I think, 1972, and many consider it the turning point in relations between the U.S. and the People's Republic of China that led to eventual recognition of the PRC by the U.S. In multitude of international foray.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Nick. It really, truly is an incredible story. I understand, of course, it wasn't scripted. It actually happened kind of on a bus, and the next thing you know, all of these wheels come into motion. Importantly, is this common ground of sport and the passion for sport that people all around the world feel. And so it's a wonderful example of that working in real life. Now, Nick, you mentioned stereotypes, and so I wanted to pick up on that, which I think is another interesting aspect of sports diplomacy. Um, on these events that are kind of global events, or massive regional events, Olympics and otherwise, countries are able to showcase their cultural identities, really, not just their athletic skill. Can you talk a little bit about that? And if you have any examples where sport, really was instrumental in challenging some stereotypes?
I think if you go through Wikipedia or Google in general, it'll be easy to find. But I think even on like a very people-to-people grassroots level, you see in these exchanges where I'd say international participants, whether they've had a preconception of what the U.S. is like or what Americans are like, and vice versa too. And in our 2-week exchanges that we might have, whether it's American participants going over to any country or any country coming out of the US, when you read kind of like when you talk to the participants after those 2 weeks, or when you hear back from kind of our partners helping us implement the programs, you always hear kind of the comment that like, oh, I thought Americans were like A, B, C, D, E, or I thought the US was going to be, like in the movies, like Hollywood is going to be like glitz and glamour, but it's very different. And I think uh, we see kind of the impact on just like the very grassroots level on how just even these 2 weeks using sports kind of to engage different participants, and how kind of a lot of misconceptions of each other is dispelled very quickly, and how they learn from each other, even just in a short period of time.
Nick, I would be curious. I mean, if you can, kind of bring us into your world in particularly in the world of American embassies abroad. I imagine that the toolkit that you've laid out is available to our diplomats, to our ambassadors, and otherwise. And should they see that maybe there is a good fit, they might call on you. How does that actually work? How does a diplomatic staff in a U.S. embassy, come to the realization, hey, what we should do? We should do some sports diplomacy.
So I think, as I mentioned earlier, we're really small staff, so we actually do rely quite heavily on our embassies and consulates around the world when we think of what programs and what countries to do different exchanges in. So uh, usually we'll solicit their opinions via what we call like a cable call for proposals. So we send out basically kind of a cable to all the embassies and consulates around the world saying, look, we have these 4 programs within kind of our arsenal for diplomatic tools. Send us kind of a proposal, what you think will matter most, because they're on the ground. Obviously, they have the local contacts in each country, and they know, I think, what sport is best to engage on. Kind of bring that kind of connection to the US too, and kind of what participant profile is best, I think, to engage with. So are we looking at women empowerment? Are we looking at empowering people with disabilities? Are we looking at diversity and inclusion? So almost every program we really rely on our diplomatic corps quite heavily.
It must be fascinating. Do you ever get the chance to go out with these envoys or groups or programs to different parts of the world?
Not yet, hopefully soon. I think because we do rely on our embassies and kind of consulates, they're already on the ground. So sometimes we just rely on them to help us do the day-to-day on the ground. But hopefully down the line, I'll be able to travel and kind of observe one of these exchanges, at least in another country. But I have been able and fortunate enough to observe exchanges when they do come to the US.
Very cool. So, Nick, here's a question from one of our participants. It's an interesting one. And I don't know if you have an example or if you can speak more broadly on this one, but it tends to be very positive. I mean, it sounds like, wow, getting people together on common ground and things that people are positively passionate about. But are there any instances where maybe sports diplomacy has had a negative impact on diplomatic relations? Either by way of an example, or more broadly, are there pitfalls that you have to think about when you think about using the tool of sports diplomacy?
Yeah, I think at least on our programming, we haven't really seen that, just because we are focused more on the grassroots level and really people to people exchanges. But I think throughout history, and I mean, definitely fact check me on some of these history, as again, I'm not a historian, but I think sports has created fissures among and like a diplomatic way. I think uh, during, I think after World War II in the 50s or so, before the Berlin Wall went up, we've had kind of tit for tat with different Soviet bloc countries over kind of East Germany's involvement and recognition into joining sporting events. So I think there was big debate within NATO countries about whether allowing, if we should be allowing East Germany to participate in skiing, participate in ice hockey, in kind of these world championship events, because it requires, obviously, when you do these events, it requires kind of visas and you need visa approvals to travel to some of these Western countries back kind of during that split. So that caused a lot of, I think, um, it did not thaw relations. Sports was a point of contention, and caused a lot of boycotts and other different countries within different blocks pulling out of different competitions because of kind of that tit for tat.
Now, looking ahead, Nick, you mentioned the upcoming Olympics. So just curious to know, what role does the State Department play in sports diplomacy when the United States hosts an Olympics?
Um, at least I can only speak to our division, not necessarily the whole government as a whole, since it's a really all government effort, even among different bureaus within just the State Department itself, because we have our consular affairs that are going to have to be doing all the visa paperwork for every participant coming in. But our division, we try to leverage our programs as best as we can to match kind of like with the Olympics, doing more athletic programming and bringing kind of disadvantaged youth to do programmings and using kind of the Olympics as a hook. So kind of our division's game is like programming. So all these mega events that surround these all our programmings will try to match them with these mega events.
Nick, since many of our viewers are Montana high school students, they would have the question, how can I get involved? In other words, could you give our viewers a little bit of a steer if they wanted to somehow, either be part of a program that, takes you overseas on sports diplomacy or possibly hosts people incoming to the United States?
I think easiest is to check our website on the State Department, and also usually our implementing partners, when such as I think the University of Montana, for example, when we announce programs and we are recruiting for participants to go, to any certain country, we usually have them advertise it through their own kind of websites and socials. And we also, keep an eye on, if you're like in a soccer team, keep an eye on your kind of league websites, because we really, for example, if we're recruiting for a soccer exchange to uh, Chile, for example, we'll have, either the league, local teams in that area that we're recruiting from, put it out, kind of call for applicants and participants. So definitely look out for those.
Well, thanks a lot for that, Nick. That really gives a better perspective. Spot on here in Montana at the University of Montana in Missoula, the Maureen and Mike Mansfield Center has a wonderful sports diplomacy program. And I think it's cool to think that, there's a wide variety of opportunities for students to engage in the world on these kinds of exchanges. Some of them are academic, some of them are cultural, but others are more sporting. And, how cool would it be to go play some soccer in Argentina? So students out there, if you're watching this, give this some thought. Check out the U.S. Department of State's website, see what kind of opportunities might be there for you as an individual or as your team, or maybe as your community to host incoming athletes on sports diplomacy programs. So let me wrap up by quickly thanking once again our very generous sponsors at the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, First Interstate Bank, Humanities Montana, and Clearwater Credit Union. They help us bring these and so many other programs to students and communities across Montana. Thanks again to our friends and partners at the U.S. Department of State. And to you, Nick Hirsch, thank you for sharing your insights and expertise on sports diplomacy. Be well, everybody. Hope to see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.